Have you ever been in a position where you're sitting around, you're thinking about exactly how you're going to, number one, make your legacy last while you're still living, and let alone what your legacy is going to be like for your heirs? You know, you show up to work, you do the right thing, you save your money in your TSP, but ultimately, it's like, are you doing the right thing? You know, never had those conversations with the somebody that understood money. I know for me growing up, and my parents, that was their biggest thing. One of the, I tell the story all the time about my dad. My dad and my mom, when I was graduating college, went through a huge foreclosure, and I was talking to my dad about it, sitting around the couch, as him and my mom were just speechless, almost an embarrassment, to be honest. And the thing that my dad said to me that day was, "Will, nobody ever sat down and talked to me about money." You know, and so what we're going to talk about today is not only legacy, but how to navigate booms in the markets and down in the market, right? With everything going on with the shutdown, what we want to do is we want to make sure you're prepared so that as things change, it doesn't have to change your outlook for your legacy. I was talking to uh, the daughter of a client of mine who I've had since 2010. And this lady I met, she worked in the in HRSA building, 5600 Fisher Lane. When Fed Legacy was first starting, one of the things I would do is we would go to different buildings. I had clients, I had a lot of clients in the HRSA building, I had a lot of clients in the VA, Department of VA downtown. And on this particular day, it was raining, and it was two ladies. They were standing in the doorway waiting for the shuttle to get to the train station in Rockville, and to go home. And so we were sitting in there. I was nervous. I was just getting started and everything, and just kind of getting started. Didn't have a whole lot of clients at the time, and so I would walk up to people and I would say, is there anybody that's supporting you and helping you understand your TSP better and your life insurance options as a federal employee? That was my thing, and so. And people would be receptive to that because there wasn't a lot of people that were doing it. And so this particular lady was like, "Well, no." She's like, "Nobody's helping me. Will you be back here tomorrow?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'll be back here tomorrow, Miss Beverly." And so I came back that next day, and she was a federal employee. She had gotten started kind of late. She started in 2008 when Obama had hired a bunch of federal employees on that time, and she was coming from DC government. And she just had no clue what she was doing. She started working. She was very happy. At that time, she was in her mid 50s, but it was a fresh start in the government for her. And so she just, she's like, "I'm working. I don't know what I'm doing, but just tell me what to do and I'll do it." And so we sat down, showed her what the catch up was. I showed her what the C fund was. I showed her, all the things she needed to do to be successful, how to reduce her option B on the FEGLI. And she gave me a referral list of 27 people. I'll never forget this. And from there, we were just the best of friends. She would invite me to her birthday parties, things like that. And so she passed a couple of months ago. And as she had gotten sick about 2 years ago, was forced to retire. And throughout this journey, me and her daughter had gotten kind of close because we were just talking about her mom's finances. And so when her mom passed, we had the sit down. It's like, okay, let's see what all this means now that this money has to be transferred over to you. And so she got the letter from TSP that you get, saying she had 90 days to take the money out of TSP and put it into her own IRA. And so, why am I telling you this? Because this lady from 2010 until this year, well, before I met her in 2010, had no clue what she was doing. Not out of ignorance. It's just nobody ever sat down with her. But from that conversation where we met in the lobby of the 5600 Fisher Lane, Rockville, Maryland, from that conversation in the lobby, me walking up to a stranger, introducing myself, to me meeting her the next day, she was able to leave her daughter hundreds of thousands of dollars in life insurance, TSP money. Her daughter has 2 kids. Her daughter's 2 kids are in college right now. From that conversation of, hey, do this, small tweaks, but made huge impacts, right? We watched COVID come. We watched major sicknesses happen, forced early retirement, you know, family emergencies happen. But through that process, we had a plan. And so, what I'm going to talk to you today, I'm going to talk to you about the shutdown and just the different booms. But the goal of it is to make sure that at that time, because it's going to happen for all of us, when you're passing money on to your family, they're looking at your finances and they're like, "Oh wow, mom left me this, dad left me this," and it's not a bomb, like a tax time bomb like we always talk about. It wasn't like when I was having this conversation with Tia. It wasn't, well, you got to manage the IRS. Now, there's some taxes in it, but we had done enough ahead of time that when Tia now receives this money, the money's already made for her, and her kids. And so as we have these conversations, I just want you to think about yourself and like, what is that conversation going to be like when your kids have the money, right? Or what's that conversation going to be like when you have to be forced to retire out of nowhere and now you're looking like, okay, what do I do? You want to be able to get ahead of that so that when those conversations do happen, it's all right. All right, well, look, we already talked about this. Let's execute on the plan that we already had, right? It just makes it a little bit easier. And so let me share my screen with you. Because the thing you want to do is you want to stay ready while everybody else panics, because when people panic, it can cause you to make big mistakes. I was talking to a lady today and we were doing we were setting up an IRA for her. And when she was sharing her screen with me, it said -3% for the year. And anybody just, if you have your money in the TSP, you've known over the last couple of months the TSP has done quite well. And I said, why do you have negative? It caught me off guard. I was like, why do you have -3%? Well, she was like, well, you told me not to do it, but at the beginning of the year, I just panicked. I just moved everything to the G fund. I just recently moved everything out of to the C fund. But because she did that, she missed out on all the gains that's happened in the last couple of months, which are double-digit gains. I think it's been like C funds up 12%. But because she panicked, her account is -3% for the year when there's a tons of people whose account is up 12%. Some people 15%. But when you panic, you make mistakes that can be costly, right? And so the goal is we don't want you to panic. We want you to have a strategy. You stick to the strategy. And when you stick to the strategy, you win. It doesn't matter what Washington does. It doesn't matter what Wall Street does. You just make sure you have a plan. So the thing that's been talked about a lot in investment circles is how similar is this AI bubble, well, it's not a bubble, but it's AI boom and this .com boom, right? Well, back in 1999, you remember this, the stock market soared because everybody thought the internet was going to be the next big thing, which it ended up being. But there was all these stocks that were inflating the market, where it was Pets.com. Pets.com was a very famous one because that was one of the biggest bursts. But it was a bunch of these stocks that came up because everybody thought the internet was this new thing and we're going to make a bunch of money on the internet, which people ended up doing. But it was all these new stocks that were coming out of nowhere. And so the stock market soared and then the stock market decreased. It's similar to what's happening right now. When you look at the S&P 500, a lot of the growth that's happening in the S&P 500 are driven by AI stocks because AI is this new thing. It's booming and there's a lot of money flowing there. But what's been talked about is, well, what happens if the S&P 500 pops just like it did back in 2000 with this AI boom? Now, not saying it's going to happen, but this is a thing that has been talked about a lot because the fundamentals are very similar. If you see these two lines, the blue line is the S&P during the .com bubble, and we're just looking at patterns. And as you see, the patterns almost are identical as during that time. The orange line is where we are right now. You see a bunch of up and down, you see a dip, then you saw it come back up. But what you ended up seeing after everybody kind of got used to the AI, to the .com bubble, and they realized that these stocks weren't worth as much as they had as the speculation had driven them to be. you started to see some of that excitement go down, which took the S&P 500 down. And if you remember back in 2000, 2001, 2002, that's been one of the few times in history where you had three straight years of negative growth in the stock market. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but what I'm saying is my job is to bring you the news and just say, hey, here's a possibility, right? And so again, the way to navigate this stuff is, again, just having a plan, right? And so here's an example of why having a plan is important. This is a screenshot of a call I had today with the client, and we had one of our tax advisors on as well. And we were taking a client through a risk assessment, right? And so one of the things we utilize is utilize this software that does these risk assessments. And they ask simple questions. This client, had a decent amount of money, and it was just asking them, like, are you the type of person that would you take a gain of 292,000 on an investment and risk losing 190? Or would you just rather just go with a certain gain of 40,000, right? And so I show this to you because I want you to be aware that when you have a plan and you go into like how you think, what you want to leave, what you want to have in retirement, you want to make sure you dial in your risk tolerance and not just wing it. Because when you dial in your risk tolerance, it helps you be able to plan more efficiently to what's going to happen, right? And so in this case, we took them through this whole thing, but we asked them a bunch of questions like this. And by asking a bunch of questions like this, it helped us to dial in what's the proper amount of risk that they should be taking within their C fund, to maybe to different IRAs. But it gave us a whole idea of like, okay, this is a married couple, blended family. And, they were just like, we want to make sure our kids are good. We don't really need the money in this particular client's case. And so in that case, they could take on more risk because the money isn't for their immediate future. The money's not for them to use in the next 10 years, 5 years, even 20 years. It's for their kids to have, and their kids are in their 40s. Now, somebody else might be in a position where, and I could say Ms. B, she was in a position where she started in the government late. So she needed some of her TSP money. So her risk tolerance was a little different, right? And so you want to make sure that when you're measuring your risk tolerance, it's not just something that you talk to your friends at lunch about, right? You want to make sure your risk or you talk to your cousins and brothers and sisters at Thanksgiving about. You want to make sure your risk tolerance is tied to your specific plan. Very, very important. You want to make sure that risk tolerance is assigned to your specific plan, because that makes a huge difference going back to what you want your legacy to be, right? Because at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, you're passing that baton to your children. And when you pass that baton to your children, you want to make it, at least I think, you want to make sure that when you're passing on, you're passing it on in a good way. And so by having these things answered, it helps you do that. And so when it comes to thinking about retirement, it goes back to two paths, right? Do you have a plan or do you panic? And when you have a plan, you don't panic, right? If you just have a plan, you don't panic. You're ready when these things come up, because you have a structure. I talk about this every week, this financial house piece, because it's super, super important, because this is what helps people not panic in retirement. You want to make sure you have your foundation. Again, your foundation is your P zone. That's where that money, like when I was having that call with Tia, the money that Miss B wanted to leave her was in that foundation. She knew, she said, no matter what, I raised Tia. I want, they had 2 properties in DC. She wanted to make sure that Tia could pay those properties off and make sure Tia could get, have enough money to put her kids through college if need be, and for Tia to be all right. First thing we did was help build that foundation. Then once she retired, we protected that foundation. So when she got sick and had that early retirement, we took from other places, because we wanted to make sure she wanted to make sure that foundation was secure, right? And that's protected money, annuities. G fund is an option, but the G fund, as we talk about all the time, is subject to market loss. Cash, another option, but you want to make sure your foundation is at least outpacing inflation. But again, you can put your money in those places, but you want to be strategic in how you do that, right? And so that's the foundation. The next piece is the walls. And the walls is all about two important things that you just cannot avoid in retirement. Things that will affect you in retirement no matter what, no matter what's going on, they're going to affect you. You just have to have a plan for it. And those are taxes and inflation. When it comes to taxes, back in 2019, tax used to not be a huge deal. But you just had to deal with your RMDs, which is a big deal, but it wasn't a huge deal. And so in 2019, the Trump administration at the time passed a Secure Act. But within the Secure Act, yes, they lowered taxes, but within the Secure Act, there was this clause called the 10-year rule. And the 10-year rule says that once you pass, any money that you have, you and your spouse pass, and you're leaving your money to your kids, any money that you have in qualified accounts, your traditional TSP is considered a qualified account, that your kids have 10 years to take that money and pay the taxes on that money and put it in their name. You used to could use what's called a stretch IRA, meaning you could leave the money in qualified funds until you get to your RMD age, which is around 72 for some people and 74 for others. But you could used to put that money there, let it grow along with your retirement, and not have to pay the taxes till later on in life. But what was happening is people just kept pushing it off. So the IRS never got that money. So in 2019, in order to help pay for the tax cuts, they put this 10-year rule in where now, if you leave your kids, let's say you leave your kids 500,000, now they have, and that money's still growing, they have to take a certain percentage of that money out every year to pay the taxes on the money to put it in their name, which forces them to pay the taxes on that, but it also raises their income tax because now they're taking in more taxable income, right? So the IRS wins in a big way. So whereas they used to could take, you could used to strategize and get away with, 12%, and keep it in the lower tax brackets. Now it's forcing people into higher tax brackets, which gives the IRS more money of the money you're trying to leave them, and takes more of their income money because now their job income is now taxed at a higher rate as well, right? And so the IRS wins in a big way. And so that's something you have to have a strategy for, because if you have a strategy, it can save you hundreds of thousands of dollars depending on how much you have in your TSP. And so, and if you have, I've seen some people have saved them $1 million, just people that are TSP millionaires. That's not everybody, but if you are somebody like that's inching closer to that, it will save you lots and lots of money in taxes just by having a Roth conversion strategy where you start paying the taxes on your terms early, so that you're not forced to pay it as that money keeps compounding and growing. I've done tons and tons of webinars about that, but if you want to talk to us one-on-one about it, just put plan in the chat, and we'll make sure that we get you a call book to talk about that. I'm about to throw a poll up. Just feel free to answer it. The next thing, though, when it comes to the walls, is just inflation. Inflation's a big deal because, like I tell people, I've said this to y'all many times on these webinars. A couple of years ago, we would talk to married couples. The amount of clients who were married, and their taxes, their health insurance costs was usually between like $300 to $400, right? But now what we're seeing is married couples who are retiring, they're paying anywhere from $600 to $800. I saw a client today, they're paying $1,100 in health insurance costs. That's inflation, right? That's inflation. It used to be without fail, it was between $200 to $300, $400 at the max for a married couple. But now those numbers are double. That's inflation, and that's not just for people that are preparing for retirement or just retire. That's even for people that are already retired, right? And so you have to make sure that your investments and your money is at least outpacing inflation. The last piece that we talk about is the roof. That goes to just how much risk are you taking, right? You want to make sure that you're not taking any risk. You want to make sure you're taking some risk, but it has to be the right amount of risk. And so that goes back to what I was showing you earlier with, and I'll go back to that screen. When you're asking yourself questions like this, or having somebody ask you questions like this to help you measure your risk so that you're taking on the right amount of risk for your situation. Right. And then the whole idea of all of these questions is to make sure that when you're looking at your legacy, when you're looking at your numbers, you see them clearly so that you're confident. And I'll tell you, most times when we're doing these calls and we're going through our retirement analyzer software where it's showing you all your numbers and showing you the possible hiccups in your plan, most people like, Mrs. Smith, I did not realize I was doing so well, right. Well, I didn't know if I tweaked this one thing that would make a huge difference. Because as federal employees, here's the thing: your benefit package is one of the best in the world. The thing is, you have to make sure you create a plan with it, though. It's not going to save you just by you just haphazardly doing whatever you want. Now that could happen, but in most cases, you need to make some tiny tweaks here and there. And so, the way to have clarity is just to make sure you have a plan and doing some of the things we talked about here. So, what I want to do now is, just want to remind you, just make sure you review, rebalance, and reinforce. That's it. If you review, rebalance, reinforce it the next year, it makes a huge difference in your retirement.